You! Celeste Hang's voice cut through the open office like a blade. Every head turned. Every keyboard went silent. Amara Jackson froze mid-step, a stack of folders pressed against her chest. Yes, you, the fat one. Standing there like you belong here. Celeste didn't lower her voice. She raised it. Do you know what you cost this department today? Do you even think before you breathe? 43 people watched. Not one of them moved. Amara's mouth opened. Nothing came out. That's what I thought. Celeste turned back to her glass office. Get out of my sight. And someone tell HR we need coordinators who can actually coordinate, not just take up space. The laughter that followed was quiet. Polite. Worse than loud. Amara walked back to her desk, sat down, and stared at her screen. And that is the moment everything changed. Not the humiliation, what she found after. If this story moves you, and I promise it will, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why the woman they called the clumsy, chubby black secretary no one wanted became the most dangerous person in the room. The morning Amara Jackson's life came apart, and then, without warning, started the way most devastating mornings do. Quietly. Ordinary enough that she almost missed it entirely. She had packed her lunch the night before. Turkey on wheat, an apple she already knew she wouldn't eat, and a small container of the leftover pasta her mother had sent home with her after Sunday dinner. She'd ironed her blouse twice because the first time she'd left a faint crease at the collar, and she couldn't afford to give anyone another reason to look at her sideways. She'd taken the 6:47 train, stood the whole way because the seats were full, and she'd learned not to squeeze in where people made it obvious they'd rather she didn't. She arrived at Halcyon Global Holdings at 7:52 a.m., 8 minutes before her shift, the same as every day for the past 4 years. The building was the kind of glass and steel structure that made a point of reminding you how small you were. 42 floors. The corporate logo, a stylized H inside a globe, was embedded in marble at the entrance. Everything about the place had been designed to communicate power to the people walking in and insignificance to the people who worked there. Amara had stopped noticing it by year 2. Now she just swiped her badge, said good morning to Marcus at the front desk, and took the elevator to the 14th floor where the financial administration department lived behind frosted glass and recycled air. Her desk was third from the back, left side of the room, positioned directly beneath a ventilation duct that ran cold all year, regardless of the season. She had complained about it once during her first year. The facilities request had gone nowhere, and she'd stopped bringing it up. She kept a cardigan on the back of her chair. She kept a small space heater under her desk that technically violated the building's electronics policy, but that nobody had ever actually cited her for. Small rebellions. The only kind available to her. The financial administration department processed records. That was the short version. The longer version involved coordinating between 7 different division ledgers, reconciling quarterly reports across 3 regional offices, maintaining a document trail that satisfied both internal compliance and the external auditors who came through twice a year and always, without exception, looked directly past Amara as though she were part of the furniture, which, functionally, she was. She was the person who caught the errors before they became problems. She was the one who cross-referenced line items at 11 o'clock at night when a report was due at 7 the next morning. She was the reason the department had posted clean audit results for 3 consecutive years. Nobody had said that out loud. Not once. Celeste Hang had been her supervisor for 14 months. Before Celeste, there had been Gerald, who was inattentive but harmless. Before Gerald, there had been Patricia, who was demanding but fair. Celeste was neither inattentive nor fair. Celeste was the kind of person who had studied power the way other people studied languages, fluently, early, with a particular gift for knowing exactly which words hurt most. She had been brought in from the New York office with a mandate to restructure the department's output metrics. What that meant in practice was that she rearranged the reporting hierarchy, moved 3 people to different floors, added 2 layers of approval to every document submission, and identified Amara within her first week as someone she could use to set an example. Amara had never been able to pin down exactly why she'd been chosen. Maybe it was her size. Maybe it was her silence. Maybe it was that she never pushed back, never argued, never cried in the bathroom loudly enough for anyone to hear. Whatever the reason, she had become Celeste's preferred target for correction, and correction was the word Celeste used even when what she meant was destruction. That Tuesday morning, Amara had submitted the quarterly cross-reference report at 7:58 a.m. She'd completed it the previous evening, checked it twice, and cross-referenced the figures against the prior quarter's baseline, the way she always did. There was a standard 2-hour review window before reports were forwarded to the division heads. She'd built her morning routine around that window. At 9:14 a.m., before the review window had even closed, Celeste walked out of her glass office and into the center of the open floor. Jackson. The room didn't quite go still. It went careful. There was a difference. When the room went still, people stopped. When it went careful, people kept moving but angled their bodies slightly away, performed busyness with just enough intensity to have plausible deniability about whether they'd heard anything. Amara looked up. Yes? The Henderson cross-reference, page 11. The allocation variance for Q3 Northwest is listed as 4.2 against a benchmark of 4.0. Celeste held the report at arm's length as though it smelled. This is wrong. Amara's fingers, already moving toward her keyboard to pull up the source file, paused. The variance is within the acceptable threshold. The benchmark range for Northwest is, I'm not asking you to explain benchmarks to me. Celeste's voice went very flat, very controlled. I'm telling you this is wrong. If I could just... Do you know what I received this morning? Celeste stepped closer to Amara's desk. Not all the way to it, just close enough to make the distance feel deliberate. A call from Marcus Webb at Division. He reviewed a preliminary copy someone sent up last night. Don't ask me why a preliminary copy was circulating. We'll address that separately. And his first question was whether our department coordinator understood basic variance calculation. The typing in the room had stopped. That was when Amara knew it had moved past the ordinary kind of bad. The figure is correct, Amara said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that later. The Northwest benchmark was revised in the August supplemental memo. The acceptable range is 4.0 to 4.5. The figure on page 11 falls within that range. Celeste stared at her for a long moment. Are you telling me, she said, that you're right and Marcus Webb is wrong? I'm saying the August supplemental memo revised the... Pull it up. Amara pulled it up. She rotated her monitor slightly so Celeste could see it. August 14th memo. Subject line, Q3 benchmark revisions, Northwest and Pacific regions. The revised range, clear as anything, in the third paragraph. Celeste read it, said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then she straightened up, turned slightly so her voice would carry, and said, You should have flagged this discrepancy more clearly in your submission notes. If the benchmark had been revised, a competent coordinator would have included a reference annotation, so the report was self-explanatory. The fact that I had to come out here and ask you about it is the problem, not the number. There it was. The pivot. Amara had been right, and Celeste had just reassembled the furniture so that being right looked like another kind of failure. Around the room, people found reasons to look at their screens. But Celeste wasn't finished. She turned, and then, as though the thought had just occurred to her, as though it were offhand, barely worth mentioning, she turned back. You know what the problem with this department is? She said it to the room, not to Amara specifically, which made it worse. We have people occupying seats who were hired because they showed up, not because they're actually capable. And then everyone wonders why we're constantly managing up instead of moving forward. She glanced back at Amara. Some of us are here to build something, and some of us are just here to take up space. A sound from somewhere across the floor. It might have been a smothered laugh, or just someone shifting in a chair. Amara would never know which. She looked at her screen. The memo was still open. The numbers were still correct. She closed the document, opened her morning task queue, and began working through it with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who understood that the only thing she could control in that moment was the quality of the next thing she did. Celeste went back to her office. The door didn't slam. It closed with a soft, definitive click that was somehow more final than slamming would have been. By lunch, people had stopped talking about it. That was the thing about public humiliation at scale. It had a very short half-life. For everyone except the person it happened to. For Amara, the sensation of 40 pairs of eyes on her sat in her chest for the rest of the morning, like something swallowed wrong. She ate her turkey sandwich at her desk. She did not eat the apple. At 1:17 p.m., a routine audit request came through her queue. One of the mid-level divisions needed a 2-year transaction trail for an account flagged during a vendor review. Standard procedure, the kind of thing that crossed her desk twice a week. She pulled the records, began running the comparison, and somewhere around the third page something caught. Not something obvious. Not a red flag. Not an alarm. Not anything that would have made an outside observer look twice. It was a $4,200 line item in a vendor payment record, a disbursement listed under facilities maintenance services, that was coded to a cost center that, as far as Amara knew, had been decommissioned 8 months ago. She stopped. She pulled up the cost center registry. The center, 77114NW, had officially been closed in February following a regional consolidation. Its budget had been redistributed. Any active charges should have triggered an automatic exception report. They hadn't. She checked the exception log. Nothing. She checked the payment authorization chain. The authorization signature was valid. It matched an executive-level access code. But the authorizing name was listed as a department head who had left the company in March, after the cost center was closed, which meant either the departure record was wrong, the authorization system had a data gap, or someone had used a credential that should have been deactivated. Any one of those explanations was possible. Any one of them, by itself, was an administrative error worth flagging. Together, in a single transaction, with no corresponding exception report, they were something else. Amara sat back in her chair. The ventilation duct above her hummed. The room smelled like burned coffee and carpet. Across the floor, someone on a call was explaining to a client why a deadline had been missed. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary building. She looked at the screen for a long time. Then, because she was Amara Jackson, and this was what she did, she followed the thread. It took her the better part of 2 hours, working quietly, not opening anything she didn't have standard access to, not triggering any review flags. She moved through the records the way she always moved through records, systematically, without assumptions, building the picture line by line. She pulled 3 years of facilities maintenance disbursements for the Northwest region. She mapped each payment against the corresponding cost center and authorization chain. She cross-referenced vendor codes against the approved vendor registry. By 3:30 p.m., she had identified 11 separate transactions spanning 14 months, all sharing the same structural anomalies as the original $4,200. The amounts varied. Some were small, a few $1,000s, the kind of number designed not to attract attention. Others were larger, much larger. One disbursement, dated the previous October, listed a vendor payment of $847,000 against a project code that didn't appear in any approved project registry she could access. She sat very still. She pulled up the vendor itself. The name on the registry was Pellinor Facilities Group. She ran a standard verification check, the kind the compliance system was supposed to run automatically at vendor registration, but sometimes, in practice, didn't actually complete. The verification returned a result that took her a moment to process. Pellinor Facilities Group did not appear in the Illinois Commercial Registry. It did not appear in any of the other state registries the system cross-referenced. The EIN listed on the account matched a company name in the database that was not Pellinor Facilities Group. The company it matched had been dissolved in 2019. The payment trail she had been following, 11 transactions, a decommissioned cost center, credentials belonging to an employee who no longer existed, a vendor that had never legally existed, was not a series of administrative errors. She understood that now. Slowly. The way you understand something your brain has already figured out but hasn't quite let yourself acknowledge yet. She saved nothing yet. She opened nothing new. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at what she had assembled on the screen in front of her. 4 years. 4 years of catching other people's mistakes. 4 years of cross-referencing and reconciling and finding the numbers that didn't fit. And she had found something tonight that was so much bigger than a misplaced decimal or an unsigned authorization form that she couldn't quite make her mind lay flat against it. Someone was stealing from Halcyon Global Holdings, and they had been doing it for a long time, carefully, with access that reached high enough to circumvent the systems designed to catch exactly this. The question was what she was going to do about it. She thought about Celeste that morning. Some of us are here to build something, and some of us are just here to take up space. She thought about the way the room had gone careful instead of still. She thought about the fact that if she reported this through normal channels, through Celeste, through the compliance department that reported to the division heads, the report would land with people she had no way of vetting against the very network she'd just found. She thought about the flash drive in her bottom desk drawer, the one she used to transfer large files between workstations when the network transfer protocol was running slow. It was nothing special, a standard 64-gigabyte drive she'd bought at the drugstore on Michigan Avenue. It had some personal files on it, a couple of photos, a document where she kept track of recipes she meant to try. She opened the drawer. The drive sat there, small and unremarkable, the same way she sat there, the same way she'd always sat there, unremarkable, overlooked, holding more than anyone had thought to look for. She looked at it for a long time. Then she heard footsteps in the corridor, measured, deliberate, moving toward the financial administration floor. Not running. That was the detail that registered first. Whoever it was, they weren't hurrying. They moved like someone who had all the time they needed and knew it. Amara closed the vendor file on her screen. Her heart was doing something strange and fast that she chose not to name. She put her hand on the flash drive. The footsteps stopped outside the frosted glass. The door opened. The door opened, and the first thing Amara noticed was not the man. It was the silence that came in with him, not the absence of sound. The building still hummed. The ventilation still pushed cold air through the duct above her head. Someone 3 floors up was still moving furniture across a hard floor. But the particular quality of sound on the 14th floor changed the moment he stepped through the frosted glass. The kind of change that happens when a room full of people simultaneously decides, without discussion, to become very small. He was not tall in the way that made people step back. He was compact, controlled, dressed in a dark suit that had cost more than Amara's monthly rent and probably her car payment combined. His face was angular, unsmiling, and carried the specific blankness of a man who had spent considerable time practicing how not to react to things. Korean, she thought, somewhere between 40 and 50, though something about his stillness made the number feel irrelevant. He moved like age had not touched him so much as agreed to leave him alone. Behind him, 2 men, not employees. She knew that before she could have explained how she knew it. They wore suits too, but on them the suits were wrong. Too careful around the shoulder, too deliberate in the fit, the way clothing looks when it's chosen to conceal something rather than present something. They stopped just inside the door. The man in front kept walking. He moved through the open floor without looking at the workstations on either side. He didn't scan the room the way visitors usually did, that habitual tourist glance, taking inventory. He walked as though he had already taken inventory before he arrived, and was now simply confirming what he already knew. His eyes moved once, briefly, and then landed on Amara's desk, and stayed there. Her hand was still on the flash drive. She did not move it. He stopped at the edge of her desk, not close enough to be aggressive, close enough to make distance a choice he was offering her. "Ms. Jackson," he said. Not a question. His English was precise, accent present but controlled, each word placed with the deliberateness of someone who had learned the language as a tool and used it as one. "My name is Kong Do-hun. I would like to speak with you." From her peripheral vision, she could see that 2 people near the window had stood up and were now standing very still, unsure whether sitting back down would be more or less conspicuous. The rest of the floor had gone to that careful, not quite stillness she recognized from the morning. 43 people becoming furniture. "About what?" "What?" she said. He glanced at her screen. She had closed the vendor file, but the taskbar still showed the access log, the cross-reference sheet, the cost center registry, all of it lined up in a row at the bottom of her monitor like evidence laid out on a table. "I think," he said quietly, "you know about what." Her chest did something complicated. She breathed through it. "I'm in the middle of a routine audit," she said. "If you have a meeting request, you can submit it through Ms. Jackson." Still quiet. Still that same flat, controlled register. "The building has security cameras on every floor. The access logs from the document management system are reviewed in real time by a monitoring system that does not belong to Hansean Global Holdings' IT department. The 7 files you accessed between 1:17 and 3:42 this afternoon have already been flagged." He paused. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because you found something, and what you do in the next 4 minutes will determine whether that finding helps anyone or disappears entirely. The ventilation duct hummed. The building breathed its recycled air. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the two men by the door. Then she looked back at him. You said 4 minutes, she said. I did. Why 4? Because in approximately 4 minutes, someone else will arrive on this floor who is not interested in having a conversation. She pulled the flash drive out of the drawer. She hadn't made a decision about it, not a conscious one. Her hands had made it while her brain was still arguing. She looked at it sitting in her palm, small and stupid and ordinary, and felt something shift in her stomach that she would later identify as the precise moment her old life ended. She plugged it into her workstation. The copy took 93 seconds. She knew because she watched the progress bar and counted her own heartbeats against it, and they didn't match at all. Her heart was running far ahead of the clock. She copied the 11 transaction files, the vendor verification result, the cost center registry extract, the access log showing every document she'd touched that afternoon. She ejected the drive. She looked at Do-hun. 4 minutes, she said. You said in 4 minutes someone else arrives. That means you got here first on purpose. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like acknowledgement. The way a person looks when someone says something they expected but are still marginally relieved to hear. Yes, he said. And the people who are not coming to talk. She stood up. Her cardigan was on the back of the chair and she grabbed it without thinking, muscle memory, the same way she always grabbed it when she left the desk. She pushed the flash drive into the front pocket of her slacks. I need my bag, she said. You have 30 seconds. Then stop talking. She grabbed her bag from under the desk. She did not look at her coworkers. She did not look at the lunch container she was leaving in the mini fridge in the break room, or the space heater under her desk that technically violated building policy. She walked toward the door and the two men in suits parted without being asked. Behind her, she heard Celeste's voice from the glass office, sharp, carrying, Jackson, where exactly do you think you're? The door to the 14th floor closed. They took a stairwell she had never used in 4 years. Not the main one near the elevators, a service corridor that ran along the building's east face, accessible through a door that required a keycard she didn't have, but that one of Do-hun's men produced without comment. The stairs went down fast, 12 flights without stopping, and nobody spoke. Amara's thighs were burning by the 8th floor, and she didn't say anything about it. She thought about saying something about it and decided against it with a clarity that surprised her. There were things that mattered and things that didn't, and her burning thighs did not currently make the list. They emerged into a loading dock at the building's east side. A black car was already there. Engine running, a third man she hadn't seen before at the wheel. Not a sedan, an SUV, dark windows, the kind of vehicle that was designed to be invisible by being exactly what people expected power to look like. She got in. Do-hun got in beside her. The other two took the front. The car moved. Where are we going? She said. Somewhere I can explain what you found. You could explain it now. I could. He looked straight ahead. But you'd have questions, and questions require materials, and the materials are not in this car. She looked out the window. Chicago moved past. The mid-afternoon version, not yet rush hour. The streets between the loop and the river still carrying that particular Tuesday energy that was neither busy nor quiet. She'd taken the bus along this route 100 times. The familiarity of it felt obscene against whatever was currently happening. Those people, she said, the ones coming to the 14th floor. Who are they? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to answer. The quiet of someone choosing which part of a long answer to give first. There is an organization, he said. It operates through a series of legitimate business fronts, of which Hansian Global Holdings is one of several. The financial structure you uncovered this afternoon, the vendor accounts, the decommissioned cost centers, the layered authorizations, is one of the channels through which this organization moves money. Not all the money, a fraction, but a significant fraction, because the channel has been running cleanly for 4 years without triggering any audit flags. He paused. Until today. How much money? He looked at her then, directly, for the first time since her desk. The portion you identified represents approximately $46 million in processed transactions. The full network. He stopped. How much? Our current estimate is 890 million. The car crossed the river. Below them, the water was gray-green and indifferent, the way Chicago water always was. And the people coming to the floor, she said again. They are enforcement assets for the organization. When the monitoring system flagged your access activity, a response was dispatched. Standard procedure. You were not supposed to have the analytical capability to connect what you connected in. He checked his watch. 2 hours and 23 minutes. I've been doing this job for 4 years. I know. Another pause, something in it that wasn't quite apology but was adjacent. We underestimated you. That is our failure, not yours. She turned that over. We, meaning him, meaning his organization, meaning he had known about the monitoring system because it was, in some way, his monitoring system, or he had access to it, or both. You said you wanted to explain what I found, she said. That's not the same as being on the right side of it. No, he said. It's not. So which side are you on? He looked out the windshield. The car was moving north now, leaving the downtown density, the buildings changing from glass towers to older brick, the city becoming itself in a different register. The side that needs the network destroyed, he said, for reasons that are complicated and not entirely clean. I won't pretend otherwise. She sat with that. The flash drive in her pocket felt very small. I want to call someone, she said. My mother. I want her to know I'm not yet. That's not Ms. Jackson. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The organization that dispatched those men has access to communication metadata. A call from your number to any number associated with you in the next 12 hours will give them a data point they don't currently have. I am asking you to wait. Not forever. 12 hours. She stared at him. He met it. 8 hours, she said. He considered it. 8 hours. She looked back out the window. She thought about her mother sitting in the house in Bronzeville, the evening news on with the volume too loud the way it always was, waiting for Amara's Tuesday check-in call that would not come. She thought about the turkey sandwich wrapper in the break room trash can on the 14th floor. She thought about the space heater under her desk. She did not let herself think about Celeste's voice in the doorway. Jackson. Where exactly do you think you're? Exactly here, she thought. I think I'm exactly here. The car turned onto a private drive she didn't recognize and passed through a gate that opened without the driver doing anything visible to make it open. The property on the other side was not what she expected. Not an estate, not anything dramatic. A converted commercial building, 3 stories, brick, the kind of structure that in another life might have been a print shop or a furniture warehouse. Functional. Unremarkable from outside. She suspected that was the point. Inside was different. Not lavish. Nothing about Do-hun seemed interested in lavish, but dense. Screens on 3 of the 4 walls of the main room displayed feeds she couldn't immediately parse, overlapping data visualizations in what looked like 4 different languages. Workstations. People at them, moving with the compressed focus of people who had too much to track and not enough time. Nobody looked up when she walked in. She got the feeling they already knew she was coming. Sit, Do-hun said. He gestured to a table near the center of the room where a laptop was already open. She sat. She didn't take her coat off. She kept her bag on her shoulder. Small signals. She was not sure he noticed, but she sent them anyway. What I'm going to show you, he said, pulling a chair to the opposite side of the table, is what we've been building for 14 months. What you found today is a piece of it. A piece we've been trying to reach from this side without success. The channels are structured so that each layer has no visibility into the adjacent layer. The only way to reconstruct the full architecture is from the inside. He opened a folder on the laptop and turned it toward her. We have been unable to get anyone inside with the analytical capability to do that reconstruction. She looked at the folder. Transaction records. Dozens of them, maybe more, organized into a structure she recognized in the way you recognize a language you've heard before but never studied. The logic of it was familiar, the same kind of logic she used every day, the same way legitimate financial records were organized, but inverted, each layer designed not to reveal the layer beneath it. You want me to rebuild it, she said. I want you to tell me if you can rebuild it, from what you have, from what you remember. She looked at him across the table. Why would I do that for you? Because, he said, Anton Vance's people were on your floor 40 seconds after mine. And unlike my people, they did not come to talk. He opened a second folder on the laptop. A name at the top of the document, Anton Vance. Below it, a photograph. She didn't know the face, but the document beneath the photograph contained a list. Names, addresses, incident reports. The kind of language that belonged in a police file but was clearly not a police file. At the bottom of the list, 2 weeks prior, a woman named Denise Crawford, financial administrator, a company called Merkson and Cole Capital Management. The incident report was 2 paragraphs. She read the first one and didn't read the second. He knows I exist, she said. It wasn't a question. He knew the moment his monitoring system flagged your access. He knows your name, your home address, the name of your mother, the Bronzeville house you grew up in. Do-hun's voice was level, clinical almost, as though the levelness was a courtesy rather than indifference. He will contact you within 24 hours. He will make an offer for the flash drive. When you decline, you don't know I'll decline. Ms. Jackson. He looked at her steadily. You copied those files before you knew who I was or why I was there. You did it because you found something wrong, and your instinct was to preserve the evidence. That instinct does not belong to someone who sells it to the highest bidder. She opened her mouth, closed it. He was right. She hated that he was right. She sat with the hating for exactly as long as she could afford to, which was about 4 seconds. And then she looked at the laptop screen again. The structure you have, she said. The 14 months of records. Are they organized by transaction date or by cost center lineage? He blinked, just once. Transaction date. That's the wrong way to read them. I'm aware. We've been unable to determine the correct cost center lineage, she said. The accounts are structured like a family tree, not a timeline. You read it chronologically. It looks like noise. You read it by origin, which cost center authorized, which subsequent center, which vendor code is the parent of which child codes. It's a hierarchy. Like a corporation, it has a spine. She pulled the laptop toward her. You have a pen? He reached into his jacket pocket and produced one. He held it across the table. She took it. She opened her bag and pulled out a legal pad she kept for handwritten reconciliation notes. Old habit. There was something about writing numbers by hand that her brain processed differently than typing them. More completely, somehow, the way some people needed to say a word aloud to really hear it. She started drawing the structure from memory. Not the full thing. She didn't have the full thing. But the 11 transactions she'd traced that afternoon, the cost center architecture, the vendor code patterns. Those were as clear in her mind as if she still had the screen in front of her. She drew nodes, connected them, labeled them. Do-hun watched her work without speaking. One of the people at the wall screens glanced over and then looked quickly back at their station. After 12 minutes, she turned the legal pad around. He looked at what she'd drawn for a long time. Then he looked up. The controlled blankness on his face had shifted, not dramatically, not into anything you could easily name, but shifted. Like a man who has been solving a problem for 14 months and has just been shown the piece the puzzle was built around. Ms. Jackson, Amara, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. Nobody calls me Ms. Jackson, not even people who are about to get me killed. He looked at her for a moment. Something in the set of his mouth changed. Not a smile exactly, but something that had the same basic architecture. Amara, he said, that is the most complete structural map we have seen of this network. It's 12% of it, she said. Maybe 15. I know. The rest is in there. She tapped the laptop screen. In your records. It'll take time to pull out, but it's in there if you read it the right way. How much time? She thought about it. 48 hours. Maybe less if I don't have to explain my process while I'm doing it. He nodded slowly. I can give you that. I want 2 things in return. He waited. My mother doesn't get touched. Nobody goes near that house in Bronzeville. Whatever is happening between you and Vance and whoever else is in this, she stays completely out of it. Done. And when this is over, when I give you whatever I can reconstruct and you do whatever you're going to do with it, you don't disappear me. I walk out. I go back to my life, or whatever is left of it. He was quiet for a moment. The second condition assumes there will be something left to walk back to. I know. She held his gaze. I'm asking anyway. Done, he said. The same word, the same flat certainty as the first time. She would spend the next 48 hours deciding whether to believe it. She pulled the laptop fully in front of her, uncapped the pen, and got to work. She had been working for about 2 hours, long enough for the light from the windows to shift into early evening gray, when her personal cell phone buzzed in her bag. She had not given anyone in this building her number. She pulled it out. Unknown number, Chicago area code. She looked at Do-hun. He was at one of the wall stations across the room. He glanced at the phone and then at her face, and something sharpened in his expression. "Don't answer it," he said. She answered it. The voice on the other end was calm, American accented, almost friendly in the tone that people use when they want to establish, very early, that friendliness is optional. "Ms. Jackson, my name isn't important right now. What's important is that you have something I need, and I have something you need, which is the next 48 hours of your life going the way you want them to, instead of the way they could." A pause. "I understand you've already made one set of friends today. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to reconsider your social calendar." She kept her voice very steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The flash drive in your front left pocket," he said. "The one you copied the records onto at approximately 3:51 this afternoon. I'd like it back. I'd like it back within 48 hours. And in exchange, I will ensure that the woman who lives at—" "Stop," she said, 1847 South. "Stop." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "Don't." A silence on the line, then, 48 hours, Ms. Jackson. You know how to reach me. You don't have my number yet, but you will. I'll send it along. Think of it as a courtesy." The line went dead. The room was very quiet. Do-hun had crossed back to the table. He stood at the edge of it, looking at her, and she looked back, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "He knows about my mother," she said. "Yes." "He had my number." "Yes." "And you said don't answer." She set the phone on the table between them. "That means you knew he'd call." Do-hun did not look away. "I knew it was likely." "That's not the same as telling me." "No." He sat down. "It's not." She stared at him. Her hands on the table were completely still. She was very aware of that, the stillness in them, because the rest of her was not still at all. "You knew he would call," she said again, "and you didn't tell me because you needed to see if I would answer." He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She thought about walking out. She actually thought about it, mapped it in her head, the distance to the door, the men who might or might not stop her, the street outside, the reality of being Amara Jackson alone on a street in a neighborhood she didn't recognize with a flash drive in her pocket, and Anton Vance's phone number about to arrive on her cell. She mapped all of it. Then she pulled the laptop back in front of her. 48 hours, she said. "I meant what I said about not explaining my process while I work." He stood. "Understood. And I want coffee. Real coffee. Not whatever's in the machine by the door that smells like it's been there since morning." He went and got her coffee. She didn't watch him go. She was already back inside the numbers, following the spine of the architecture the way she always followed it. Quietly, methodically, the way water finds a crack in stone. Somewhere across the city, her mother's phone was ringing with no answer. Somewhere on the 14th floor of Hansian Global Holdings, a desk sat empty, a space heater still running beneath it, a cardigan gone from the back of the chair. And in Do-hun's private operations building, Amara Jackson began rebuilding an $890 million criminal empire from memory, one line item at a time, because it was the only thing she could do that might matter. And because the woman who had spent 4 years being told she was taking up space had just discovered that the space she occupied was exactly the size of everything they'd been afraid of. 48 hours. She would hold them to it. She bent her head over the laptop and the scratch pad, the pen moving steadily across the paper, and outside the window Chicago went dark around her the way it always did. Indifferent, enormous, and completely unaware that something irrevocable had just begun. She worked through the night, not continuously. There were 2 breaks, both of them short, both of them her idea, because Do-hun's people seemed prepared to let her work until she dissolved into the chair. The first break was at 11:40, when she walked to the bathroom and stood over the sink with cold water running over her wrists, the way her grandmother used to tell her to do when she was overwhelmed as a child. Cold water on the pulse points. "It works," her grandmother had said. Because the body doesn't know the difference between calm and the physical conditions of calm. You fake the conditions, the body follows. Amara had thought it was superstition at 9 years old. At 34, alone in a bathroom, in an unmarked building somewhere north of the Loop, with a flash drive in her pocket and a criminal empire sketched across 3 legal pads, she found it worked well enough. The second break was at 2:15 in the morning when one of Do-hun's analysts, a young Korean woman named Ji Yeon, who had barely spoken 10 words since Amara arrived, but who moved through data the way some people move through crowded rooms, instinctively, without collision, brought her food without being asked. Rice, something with vegetables, chopsticks, and a fork together on the tray because Ji-yeon apparently wasn't sure which she'd want. Amara used the fork. She ate the whole thing without tasting it and went back to work. By 4 in the morning, she had reconstructed 63% of the network architecture. It was not a clean 63%. There were gaps, branches she could identify by the shape of the space around them even when she couldn't fill them in. The financial equivalent of knowing a word is missing from a sentence without knowing which word. But the spine was solid. The hierarchy of cost centers, the vendor code family tree, the authorization chains that moved legitimate-looking money through 7 layers of corporate structure before it surfaced, cleaned, in accounts that belonged to holding companies in 3 different countries. She had it mapped. Not completely, but enough that someone who knew what they were looking for could find the rest. Do-hun had not slept. She noticed this the way she noticed things, peripherally, without making a point of it. He moved between the wall stations and the table where she worked, spoke occasionally in Korean to his analysts in a voice low enough that she couldn't have followed it, even if she'd spoken the language, and came back to look at her progress with the same controlled attention he brought to everything. At one point, around 3 in the morning, he brought her coffee without her asking. She acknowledged it by drinking it without stopping what she was doing. He seemed to understand that as a thank you. "This branch," she said, at 4:17, tapping the legal pad. "The one that routes through the Pacific cost centers. I can see the authorization pattern, same structural logic as the Northwest chain, same parent-to-child coding. But the vendor codes don't match anything in the Hanseon registry. They're using a completely separate entity." Do-hun leaned over the pad. "Separate how?" "Separate like it was built independently and then connected here." She pointed to a node she'd drawn and labeled with a question mark, "at this junction point," which means there's a second organization feeding into the same laundering architecture, not Hanseon, something that runs parallel to it. He straightened. His face did the thing it did when she said something he had not expected. Not surprise exactly, but a subtle recalibration, like a compass needle swinging toward a new north. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain the vendor codes are structurally distinct from everything else in the network. What that means about the source, I can tell you with more confidence in about 6 more hours." 6 hours, he repeated. "Maybe 5 if your analyst stops hovering and actually pulls the Pacific Regional Disbursement records I asked for 40 minutes ago." Across the room, Ji-yeon, who had apparently been listening while appearing not to, immediately turned to her workstation. Do-hun watched her go and then looked back at Amara with an expression that was, in its very small way, something close to amusement. "She doesn't hover," he said. "She was absolutely hovering. It's fine, she's good at her job. But I need those records." He went to speak to Ji-yeon. Amara turned back to the legal pad. The records came through at 4:31. She was deep inside them by 4:45, following the thread of the Pacific branch the way she'd followed the original $4,200 discrepancy. Not dramatically, not with any sense that she was close to something significant, just the steady, methodical attention of someone who knows that the answer is in the data if you read the data correctly. She found it at 5:52 in the morning. She didn't react immediately. That was the thing about finding something that reorders everything. There was always a lag between the moment of discovery and the moment you let yourself understand what you'd discovered. She sat with the Pacific branch records open on the laptop and the corresponding section of her legal pad in front of her, and she looked at the junction point she'd marked with a question mark, and she looked at the vendor codes feeding into it, and she looked at the authorization signature attached to those codes. The authorization signature was not a corporate credential. It was a personal one, a named individual signatory. Rare in this kind of layered structure precisely because named signatories created a direct chain of accountability. Using one here was either sloppy or intentional. Given the precision of everything else in the network's construction, she didn't think it was sloppy. The name on the signature was Kong Min Jai. She read it 3 times. The name did not change. She looked up at Do-hun, who was standing at one of the wall stations with his back to her, reviewing something with 2 of his analysts. She looked at the name again. She looked at the structure around it. The Pacific branch feeding into the main network, the authorization pattern showing not a single transaction, but a recurring one, time-stamped across the past 22 months. 114 separate authorizations. The earliest one dated to 2 months after Do-hun had told her he'd begun this investigation. Kong Min Jae. She pulled the personnel file index she'd been given access to for cross-referencing purposes. She found the name in 40 seconds. A photograph. A young man, late 20s, the same angular facial structure as Do-hun, but softer, less settled, the face of someone who hadn't yet decided what to do with themselves. Listed role: Internal Operations Director, Pacific Division, Do-hun's younger brother. She sat very still. The building breathed its climate-controlled air around her. Outside, Chicago was beginning its early morning gray, the particular colorless light that arrives before dawn commits to anything. She could hear Ji-yeon's keyboard. She could hear something running in the ventilation. She thought about the 48-hour window. She thought about the fact that she had 36 hours remaining on it. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in a building that belonged to a man whose brother was apparently the source of the second revenue stream, feeding the criminal network they were both trying to dismantle. She had thought about all the ways that information could go wrong depending on how she handled the next 60 seconds. She turned the legal pad face down on the table. She closed the record on the laptop. She picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, and stood up. "I need more coffee," she said. Do-hun turned from the wall station. "Ji-yeon, I'll get it." She moved toward the coffee station near the east wall, where she'd located it during her second break. She poured a cup. Her hands were steady. She found that interesting. She stood at the coffee station with her back to the room and thought, with the focused urgency of someone who has very little time to think, about what she was going to do. Option 1. Tell Do-hun right now, directly, with the evidence open on the laptop. Watch his face. See what happened next. The problem with option 1 was that she had no way to predict what his reaction would do to the investigation, to her own position in it, to the deal she'd made regarding her mother's safety. A man confronting evidence of his brother's betrayal was not a predictable variable. Option 2, copy the evidence to the flash drive and tell nobody yet. Preserve it independently before anyone else had the chance to make it disappear. The problem with option 2 was that she would have to go back to the laptop, open the records again, complete the copy without anyone noticing, and she was in a room full of people whose professional skill set included noticing things. She stood at the coffee station and looked at the wall in front of her. There was a small scratch in the brick at eye level, an irregular white line that might have been from a piece of moved furniture. She looked at it and made her decision. She went back to the table. She sat down. She opened the laptop. She plugged the flash drive in. Ji-yeon looked over. Amara did not look back. She pulled up the Pacific records, opened the vendor transaction log, and began copying to the drive with the same calm focus she'd used to copy the Hanseon records 17 hours and a different lifetime ago. The copy took 44 seconds. She ejected the drive and put it back in her pocket. Then she turned the legal pad over. Do-hun, she said. He was at her side in 15 seconds. She had noticed, over the course of the night, that he moved faster when she used his name instead of waiting for his attention. She filed that away. She turned the laptop toward him, the Pacific records open, the authorization chain visible. She pointed to the junction node. She pointed to the signatory name. She watched his face. He looked at the screen for 4 seconds, then 5. Then the blankness she'd come to read as his resting expression did something she hadn't seen it do before. It didn't crack. That implied drama, and this was not dramatic. It compressed. Like a structure under weight, the components moving not outward but inward, everything pulling tight toward a center. He straightened up. He said nothing. He turned and walked to the far end of the room, to a door she hadn't been through, and closed it behind him. The room was very quiet. Ji-yeon's keyboard had stopped. 2 of the other analysts had also gone still, not looking at the door, not looking at each other, not looking at Amara. She looked at the door. She waited. He was behind it for 11 minutes. When he came back, his face was back to the controlled blankness. Only his eyes were different. They had the particular flatness of someone who has made a very fast, very hard decision and closed the door on every alternative. He sat down across from her. "How long has this branch been active?" he said. 22 months. 114 individual authorizations. The total value routed through this junction. I don't have the destination account data, so I can't give you a complete figure. Based on the transaction volumes I can see, she did the math quickly in her head. Somewhere between 60 and 80 million, possibly more. He nodded, very slow. Like his body was performing deliberateness because his mind needed the time. "You copied it to the drive," he said. "Yes." He looked at her. "Good," he said. She had not expected that word. She sat with it. "Why good?" "Because Min Jae is currently in this building. He arrived 40 minutes ago for a briefing that I requested, and which I now understand he accepted because he wanted to assess how close we were to identifying his involvement." He paused. "He will have seen the light under the door of this room. He knows we have been working through the night. He will be attempting to determine what we've found." She absorbed this. 40 minutes ago, she'd been deep in the Pacific records. She hadn't heard a door, hadn't heard voices, hadn't heard anything beyond the walls of this room. "He knows I'm here," she said. "He knows I brought someone in with financial analytical capability. He does not know what you've reconstructed." Do-hun folded his hands on the table. "In approximately 10 minutes, I'm going to walk out of this room and tell him there's a problem with the Pacific branch records. I want to see his response." "You want to see if he runs?" "I want to see if he destroys evidence first." He looked at her steadily. "The intel files. The operational records for the Pacific Division. He has administrator access to the archive system. If he's done what I think he's done, given Vance's people operational intelligence to use against us for the past 22 months, there will be records in that archive that he will want to eliminate the moment he understands he's been identified." She thought about that. "And if he destroys them? Then we lose the evidence needed to prove what the intelligence was, how it was used, and how many operations were compromised." His voice did not waver. It was as flat and steady as everything else about him. But she was beginning to understand that flatness was not the same as absence. It was the opposite. It was presence under very high pressure, compressed so tightly it could not afford to move. "The financial records you have on that drive will be enough to prove the laundering. They may not be enough to prove the full scope of what he's done." She looked at the flash drive outline in her pocket. She pressed 2 fingers against it through the fabric of her slacks. "Go talk to your brother," she said. He stood. He straightened the front of his jacket. He looked at her for one moment, and she had the sense that he was looking for something in her face. Reassurance, or maybe just the confirmation that she was still there, still in, still not gone. "I won't be long," he said. "Take the time you need," she said. And because she was Amara and she said what she thought even when she maybe shouldn't, she added, "I'm sorry about your brother." He looked at her, and this time there was no ambiguity in his expression. It was grief. Clean, unadorned, the face of a man absorbing something that he had perhaps already known and had hoped was wrong. "So am I," he said. He left the room. She heard voices almost immediately, from somewhere above, another floor, the building's bones carrying sound in ways she hadn't mapped yet. The voices were in Korean. She could not understand the words, but she understood the register, controlled, formal, the particular cadence of a conversation being conducted carefully by 2 people who both know more than they're saying. She turned back to the laptop. She heard it then. Not the voices. Something else. A different sound from a different part of the building. Rapid movement, not running exactly but close to it. The specific percussion of someone moving with urgent purpose through a space they knew well. Heading somewhere. Moving fast. Ji Yeon heard it too. She looked up. Then every screen in the room went gray. Not off. Gray. The data feeds on the wall stations, the open files on the workstations, the archive access windows that 2 analysts had been cross-referencing, all of it replaced simultaneously by a flat gray field, and in the center of each screen, a single line of text. "Access revoked. Administrator override." Min Jae K. Ji Yeon said something in Korean, very sharp, very short. She was already typing, pulling up a secondary system, trying to reinstate access. The two other analysts were doing the same. The sound of keyboards became frantic, which Amara found strange because frantic typing was exactly as ineffective against a full administrator override as calm typing, but she understood it because the alternative was sitting still, and sitting still felt like giving up. She looked at the laptop in front of her. It was also gray. She looked at her legal pads. All of the work she'd done through the night, the reconstructed architecture, the cost center maps, the transaction flows, the authorization chains, was on those legal pads. 3 of them, filled front and back with her handwriting, numbers, and connective lines and margin notes. The full picture of an $890 million criminal empire, as she understood it, at 6:09 in the morning on the second day of the rest of her life. She gathered them from the table. All 3. She rolled them and put them in her bag. She was doing this when Do-hun came back through the door, moving fast, not running, but close. "He's gone," Do-hun said. "He overrode the archive system before I got to the floor. Every intelligence file, operational records, source lists, asset locations, all of it is gone." He looked at the gray screens around the room. His jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen before. 14 months of intelligence, gone. The room was very quiet. Then Amara said, "Not all of it." He looked at her. She pulled the flash drive from her pocket. "The financial architecture. Everything I reconstructed last night. It's on here." She held it up. "The intel files you lost, I can't replace those. But the financial case," she tapped the pocket where the legal pads were. "I have it. In my handwriting, on paper, which your brother's administrator override does not reach." He crossed to her in 4 steps and took the flash drive from her hand, not roughly, but with the contained urgency of a man who understands exactly what he's holding. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. "He will know we still have this," he said. "Yes." "Which means he will tell Vance." "Yes." "Which means Vance will accelerate. 48 hours becomes less," she said. "I know." From somewhere outside the building, not close but not far, she heard the low percussion of something she didn't immediately identify. Then Ji-yeon looked up from her workstation and said something in Korean that was short and sharp and stripped of everything except urgency. Do-hun moved to the wall and said 4 words in response. 2 of his men by the door were already moving. "What is that sound?" Amara said. He turned from the wall. His face had shed the last trace of the compressed grief she'd seen in it 4 minutes ago. What replaced it was not anger. It was the particular clarity that Amara would come to associate with Do-hun in the moments when he stopped analyzing and started deciding. "Vance's people," he said. "They're outside." He looked at her bag, at the outline of the rolled legal pads inside it. "The flash drive. Do you have it backed up anywhere?" "No." "We need to fix that in the next—" He listened to something she couldn't hear. His head tilted slightly. 90 seconds. She grabbed the laptop. "Is there a printer in this building?" "East corridor, second room." She was already moving. The laptop was dead, gray-screened, cut off from the network. But the flash drive was hers, and the files on it were not network-dependent. She needed a workstation with a live local connection, not an internet connection, just power and a USB port. The printer room was 20 steps down a corridor she hadn't been in before. She found it in the dark, hit the light switch, found the workstation against the east wall exactly where he'd indicated. She plugged in. The workstation was on a separate circuit from the main network. She could tell immediately from the interface, older system, standalone, not affected by the override. She plugged the flash drive in and pulled up the contents and began printing. The printer was old and slow. The financial files were dense. She stood over it with both hands flat on the desk while it worked and listened to the building and thought about all the decisions she'd made in the past 24 hours and could not identify a single one she would have made differently, which surprised her because she'd expected to find at least one. The sound outside was louder now. Do-hun appeared in the doorway. "We have to move." 30 seconds. Amara, 30 seconds. She looked at him. 30. If we leave without these pages, we leave without a case. He looked at the printer. He looked at the door behind him. He came into the room, positioned himself at the door, and waited with his back to her. The printer finished. She pulled the pages, 37 of them, warm, dense with numbers that only she could fully read, and folded them inside the legal pads and pushed the whole thing back into her bag. She pulled the flash drive. "Done," she said. They moved. The east corridor, then a stairwell she hadn't used before, then a subground level she hadn't known existed. A parking structure, one level below the loading dock, 4 cars already running when they arrived. Do-hun's people moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who had planned for this, which told her something. He had known this was possible. Not certain, but possible. He had built the exit before he needed it. They were in the car and moving before she'd fully processed being in the car. The vehicle went up a ramp she hadn't seen from the outside, emerged onto a street she didn't recognize, turned immediately north. She sat with her bag in her lap and the legal pads against her ribs and the flash drive in her closed fist. Minjai was in the wind. Vance's people were at the building they'd just left. The intelligence archive was gone. The digital case she'd spent 12 hours building had been wiped behind a single administrator override, in the same building with her for 40 minutes without her knowing it. What remained was what she had physically carried out of the building. 37 printed pages, 3 legal pads, and a flash drive. Her handwriting, her memory, and the 12% of the original evidence she'd had the sense to copy before she'd understood how bad things could get. She looked at Do-hun. He was on a phone she hadn't seen before, different from the one he'd been using last night. He spoke in Korean, low and fast, his free hand pressed flat against his knee. She thought about her mother. 8 hours, she'd said, and it had been more than 12. She thought about her phone still in her bag, the unknown number that had called, the 48-hour window that was now collapsing into something much shorter. She thought about Celeste Hang's voice. Some of us are here to build something. She thought about the $4,200 discrepancy that had started all of this. $4,200 misrouted through a decommissioned cost center, a thread so thin it should have been invisible. She had pulled it anyway. Not because she was brave, not because she understood what was on the other end of it. She had pulled it because a number was wrong, and she could not leave a wrong number alone. It was the most ordinary thing about her, the thing she'd done every day for 4 years in a job where nobody cared that she did it, and it had led her here, in a car moving fast through a city going pale with early morning, holding the evidence of a criminal empire in a tote bag that also contained a turkey sandwich container and a legal pad she used for recipes. The car stopped at a light. For one moment, the city was just the city. Ordinary, enormous, unhurried, the first commuters beginning their own ordinary Wednesdays completely unaware. Do-hun ended his call. He sat with the phone in his hand. He turned to her. "We have a location," he said. "A secondary facility. We can be there in 20 minutes. "And Minjay?" He said nothing for a moment. In that silence was everything she needed to know about what it cost him to say the next sentence. "We'll find him," he said. She looked at him. "You said he had access to operational intelligence, asset locations. Do you know what he gave Vance?" "Not yet." "Which means you don't know what Vance knows about you, about your people, about where we're going right now." He held her gaze. "No," he said. "We don't." The light changed. The car moved. Amara Jackson sat in the back seat of a car moving toward an unknown location with a man she'd known for less than 20 hours, carrying evidence that 2 separate criminal organizations would do serious harm to retrieve, in a city that was waking up around her as though nothing had changed. And she understood with a clarity that had nothing comfortable in it that the woman who had walked onto the 14th floor of Hanseon Global Holdings yesterday morning with a turkey sandwich and a perfectly ironed blouse was not coming back. That woman was gone. What was riding in this car instead was someone who had not yet decided what she was, only what she was going to do next. And for now that was enough, because the alternative to moving forward was standing still in a city where standing still had just become the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. The bag sat in her lap, the evidence pressed against her side. She held the flash drive in her closed fist all the way there. The secondary facility was a converted warehouse in Pilsen, 3 stories of industrial brick that had once processed something. She could still smell the ghost of machinery and metal in the walls. They arrived at 6:47 in the morning. The sky outside had committed finally to daylight, the kind of flat gray Chicago morning that made everything look temporary. There were already people inside. 8 of them, maybe 10. She stopped counting when she realized counting made her feel like she was assessing her odds of surviving the room, which was not a useful line of thinking. They moved with the same compressed efficiency as Do-hun's people at the first facility. Eyes up, hands visible, the practiced calm of people trained to perform calm even when calm was not what they felt. Someone had set up a workstation against the north wall. Newer equipment than the printer room she'd used, standalone the same way, physically separated from any network connection that could be compromised remotely. She saw that and understood it as a message. They'd been building toward this room for longer than last night. She put her bag on the table. She took out the legal pads. She took out the 37 printed pages, slightly crumpled from being folded inside the pads during the drive. She smoothed them flat with her palm and arranged them in sequence, rebuilding the architecture visually the way a surgeon might lay out instruments before an operation. Not dramatic, just necessary, every piece in the place where it would be needed. Do-hun spoke to two of his people near the door, low and fast, and they left immediately. He crossed to where she was working. "We have communications running to 3 financial regulatory contacts," he said. 2 in the US, 1 through an international channel. When you're ready to transmit, we can route through a secured uplink that won't trace back to this location. She looked up. "How long to get the transmission ready?" 40 minutes to verify the routing, then however long it takes you to compile the package. "I need 2 hours to annotate the financial records so they're readable without me explaining them in person. Regulatory contacts need context. Raw data without context gets quarantined while someone tries to figure out what they're looking at." She turned back to the pages. 2 hours, then we transmit. "Vance, I know about Vance." She didn't look up. 2 hours. He paused. She could feel him calculating. He said, "Work fast," and moved away. She worked fast. The annotation process was not simple, and she did not allow herself to treat it as simple. Every transaction she'd reconstructed needed a notation explaining what it represented, where it sat in the hierarchy, what the authorization chain demonstrated about the source of the funds. Without those notations, a regulatory analyst seeing the records for the first time would spend a week trying to understand what they were looking at. With them, the pattern would be visible in an hour. She wrote in the margins. She wrote on separate sheets. She moved between the legal pads and the printed pages and the workstation keyboard, building the package layer by layer, because this was what she did and she was going to do it right even with the walls closing. 45 minutes in, Ji-yeon arrived. She hadn't known Ji-yeon was coming, hadn't known she was still with them, actually, had lost track of her in the evacuation. She walked in with a secondary hard drive and a look on her face that meant she had something and it wasn't good. She went to Do-hun first. They spoke in Korean for 2 minutes. Amara kept working. She had learned over the past 18 hours that whatever Do-hun was going to tell her, he would tell her when he was ready, and trying to rush it wasted the time she needed for her own work. He came to her at the table. "Ji-yeon pulled something before the override locked us out," he said. She had a secondary extraction running in the background, a mirror process that captured fragments of the Intel archive as it was being deleted. Amara looked up. Fragments. Incomplete, but enough to establish what Min-jae was passing to Vance. He paused. He gave them location data for 3 of our active operations over the past 14 months. 2 of those operations were compromised as a direct result. People were... He stopped, started again. "We lost 4 people." She held his gaze. He held hers. "I'm sorry," she said. "The 3rd operation was this one." His voice was entirely level. "He told them about you. Approximately 6 hours after I brought you to the first facility. The timeline means he knew about you before the archive override, before last night's..." He stopped again. The room was very quiet. "He told Vance about me 6 hours after I arrived," she said slowly. "Which means Vance knew where I was." "Yes." "Which means Vance let me keep working." Do-hun was quiet for 1 second. "Yes." She put the pen down. She needed to put the pen down because her hands had done something involuntary that she didn't want visible. She pressed both palms flat on the table. "Why would Vance let me keep working if he knew where I was?" "Because he believed he could retrieve the evidence after the reconstruction was complete." Do-hun's voice was precise, clinical, each word placed. "Destroying incomplete records is useful. Destroying a complete annotated financial map of the entire network is more useful. He let you build it. Then he moved." She looked at the pages spread across the table. The annotated records. 37 printed pages and 3 legal pads of handwritten reconstruction, assembled over the course of a night by the woman everyone had dismissed, which was now exactly what Anton Vance wanted her to finish so he could take it and use it for something she did not want to think about. He doesn't want to destroy the evidence, she said. He wants to weaponize it. Do-hun looked at her. If you have a complete annotated map of the network, she said, and you're a competing criminal organization, that map doesn't hurt you. It tells you exactly where the money is, where the accounts are, where the access points are. You could use it to take the network over instead of dismantling it. She heard herself saying it and heard it land. He doesn't want to stop the laundering operation. He wants to own it. The silence in the room had changed quality. Two of Do-hun's people near the wall had stopped what they were doing. Yes, Do-hun said, quietly, like the word cost something. And Min-jae. She looked at him. Min-jae wasn't just betraying you to Vance. He was positioning himself. If Vance takes the network, Min-jae gets a seat at the table. Do-hun's jaw tightened. Just once. Then it released. Yes. She picked the pen back up. Her hands were steady again. The involuntary thing had passed. Then I finish the annotation, she said, and we transmit to the regulators before Vance gets here. Amara, but we transmit first. She looked at him directly. That's the only play. If Vance gets the package before it goes to regulators, it doesn't matter. The financial case goes dark, he uses it to absorb the network, and nobody goes to prison for anything. But if the regulators have it first, she paused. How fast do international regulatory bodies freeze accounts after receiving a documented case of this scale? Hours, he said. If the documentation is clean and complete. Hours. Then I need 90 more minutes. She turned back to the table. And I need you to make sure those 90 minutes exist. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he turned to the room and began speaking in Korean, rapidly, and the room shifted, people moving to different positions, phones coming out, the whole space reorienting around a single access point that was, improbably, a 34-year-old financial coordinator from Bronzeville with a tote bag and a pen. She bent her head and worked. She was 20 minutes into the final section of annotations when the first sound came from outside. Not close, but not far. A vehicle, moving too fast for the street, and then a second one, and then, distinct, unmistakable, the sound of someone at the facility's perimeter meeting resistance. Do-hun's people responded before she'd consciously registered what the sound meant. 3 of them moved to the doors. 2 went upstairs. Ji-yeon pulled the secondary hard drive from the workstation, wrapped it, put it in a sealed bag without being asked, and stood holding it with both hands against her chest. Keep working, Do-hun said to Amara, already moving toward the door. I am, she said. She was. She did not stop. Her handwriting got faster but not messier. She had written numbers fast under pressure for 4 years, and her hand knew how to move quickly without losing precision. She moved through the remaining transactions, each one annotated, each one placed in the hierarchy, building the context that would make the package legible to someone who hadn't spent the last 18 hours inside her head. A sound from the north side of the building, a door taking impact, not breaking, whatever they were using for security was holding, but taking impact, which meant it was being tried. From somewhere above her head she heard movement, running. 2 sets of feet moving across the floor above its speed, then stopping, then 1 pair continuing and 1 pair not. She did not let herself parse what the silence of the second pair meant. Do-hun came back to the room. He was moving faster than she'd seen him move, and there was something different about the way he was holding his left arm, slightly away from his body, the elbow bent at an angle that looked like a choice rather than a habit. She kept her eyes on the pages. How much longer? He said. 30 minutes. We have 15. She did not look up. Then I'll work faster. Amara, what happens if I stop right now and we try to transmit an incomplete package? He was quiet. The regulators get half a case, she said, still writing, which means their legal teams spend 3 weeks determining whether it's sufficient to act on, while Vance's people spend those same 3 weeks relocating the accounts. We need the full package, 25 minutes. 15, he said. That is what we have. She compressed. She did not think about compressing. Her hands just did it, the way they'd done everything else tonight, the body making decisions faster than the brain could frame them. She cut every annotation to its minimum viable form. Not shorthand. The regulators needed legible prose, not symbols. but stripped, essential, the distilled version of every explanation, every contextual note, every chain of logic. She moved through the remaining pages with the focused brutality of someone who understands that perfection is no longer the standard and adequacy with time is worth more than excellence without it. From the north door, impact again, harder, and this time the sound of voices. Not Do-hun's people, other voices, English and something else. The particular compressed communication of people executing a plan under time pressure. Do-hun said something in Korean to the two people remaining in the room. One of them took a position at the interior door, the other moved to the workstation. Ready to transmit, the man at the workstation said. His English was accented but precise. Uplink is live, waiting on the package. She wrote the last annotation on the last page. She read it back in 3 seconds. It was enough. Scan these. She pushed the annotated pages across the table, all of them, in order. The legal pads first, then the printed pages. He was already moving. The scanner was integrated into the workstation and it was fast, faster than the printer had been, the pages moving through in sequence, the digital files building on the screen in real time. Do-hun came back into the room. His left arm was worse now. She could see it without staring, the way he'd shifted his weight to compensate. He was talking on the phone again, the new one, and his voice had taken on a quality she hadn't heard before. Not panic, not even close to panic. Something colder. The tone of a man who has passed the point where managing his emotions serves any purpose and has moved into the place where the only thing that matters is what happens next. She crossed to the workstation. The scan was at 73%. She stood over it. "How long on the uplink?" she said to the man running it. 30 seconds after the scan completes. "The routing is secured." "Yes." "And the 3 regulatory contacts? They're expecting a package?" "They were notified 40 minutes ago. They're standing by." The scan hit 89%. The north door gave. Not completely. It didn't fly open, didn't collapse inward, but she heard the sound of the mechanism failing, the specific crack of something structural giving under sustained force, and then voices that were definitely not Do-hun's people, moving fast through the ground floor. Do-hun said one word in Korean, short, sharp. The man at the interior door moved his position. Ji Yeon pressed herself against the east wall, both hands still holding the hard drive against her chest. 94%. The interior door opened, not the one their man was covering, a second door, to the right of the workstation, that she hadn't registered as a door because it was flat against the wall and painted the same gray as the rest of the surface. It opened inward, and the man who came through it was not tall, not physically imposing, not the kind of person who announced himself with his presence. He was maybe 30. Lean the way people who don't eat enough are lean rather than the way athletes are lean. Dark hair, dark jacket, a face that looked like Do-hun's in the way that all the underlying architecture was the same, but everything built on top of it had made different choices. Kong Min-jae. He looked at the workstation. He looked at the scan progress, 96%. And he looked at Amara standing over it, and his face did something fast and ugly and then went still. "Stop the scan," he said. His English was better than she'd expected, almost unaccented. No one moved. "Stop the scan," his eyes on Amara. "You don't understand what you're doing." 98%, the man at the workstation said. His voice was entirely flat. "You're going to destroy 14 years of work," Min-jae said. Still to Amara, stepping closer. "Not just this network, everything connected to it. Do you know how many people operate under the protection of this structure? How many legitimate operations?" "You gave Vance the locations of your brother's people," Amara said. 4 of them are dead." Something moved in his face. She watched it move and she did not look away from it, and she made herself remember that whatever he was feeling in that moment was real. She could see it was real, and it did not change anything about what she was going to do. "That was not—" He stopped, started again. "That was not supposed to happen." 99, the workstation man said. "It happened," she said. "Step back." He did not step back. He stepped forward, and he had something in his right hand that she hadn't seen until he moved. Not a weapon, she realized, in the half-second before she understood what it was. A drive. Small, black, the same unremarkable form factor as her own flash drive. He held it up. Everything you gave them is already on this, he said. I pulled a copy while you were in the East Corridor running your scan. Before the override, but I had 4 minutes. I used them. He looked at Do-hun, who had come through the door behind him silently, moving with the particular care of someone managing a physical injury. Do-hun, Hyung, listen to me. Hyung, older brother. The word landed in the room and changed the air in the room. Do-hun stopped. He stood 6 feet from Min-jae. He did not speak. If that package transmits, Min-jae said, everything collapses. Not just Vance, everything. Every account, every structure, every piece of what our father built. All of it gone. Frozen, prosecuted. People who have nothing to do with Vance, people who have been... The transmission is complete, the workstation man said. The room stopped. Min-jae's hand with the drive in it dropped slightly. Not all the way, but slightly. The way a hand moves when the body absorbs something the mind hasn't finished processing. Do-hun let out a breath. Just one. Slow. It's done, Amara said. She was looking at the screen. The confirmation was there. Timestamp, routing verification, 3 recipient acknowledgements, each one arriving within 4 seconds of the others. 3 regulatory bodies on 2 continents had just received a complete, annotated financial map of an $890 million criminal network. It's done. Min-jae looked at the screen. He looked at the drive in his hand. He looked at his brother. Do-hun crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. He stood in front of Min-jae, close enough that when he spoke only Min-jae could hear it. Amara could not hear the words. She didn't try to. She looked at the confirmation screen and felt something in her chest that was not triumph and was not relief and was not exactly anything she had a name for. Something that came after the body has run very hard and very far and has not quite stopped yet, even though the thing it was running toward has been reached. She became aware then of sounds from outside that were different from before, not the impact sounds of Vance's people breaching the perimeter. Sirens. Multiple, converging. The particular layered pitch of different agencies responding to the same location from different directions. She looked at Do-hun's man at the workstation. The regulatory notification triggered an alert protocol to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, he said. He was looking at his screen. Happens automatically when the documentation meets a certain threshold. He paused. We have maybe 6 minutes. She looked at the door. She looked at her bag on the table, the empty legal pads, the smoothed pages of annotation. She picked up the flash drive from where she'd set it beside the workstation. Her original flash drive, still with its own copy of the evidence that had started all of this. She put it in her pocket. From where he stood with his brother, Do-hun said, without turning, Amara. I hear the sirens, she said. We need to... I know. She picked up her bag. She put the cardigan in it that she'd been carrying since she grabbed it from her chair on the 14th floor. The one she'd been wearing over the same blouse she'd ironed twice the morning before, which now felt like it had happened to a different person in a different century. Min-jae and Do-hun were still standing close together, the conversation between them down to almost nothing. Not words anymore, or not many, just the specific frequency of 2 people who have known each other their whole lives, having the conversation that ends something they cannot get back. She didn't watch it. It wasn't hers to watch. She walked to the door that Do-hun had come through and looked back. Ji-yeon was still against the east wall, still holding the hard drive. She met Amara's eyes and gave a single small nod, the nod of someone acknowledging that a thing has been done and done correctly, which was a more precise form of recognition than anything Amara had received in 4 years of clean audits. She nodded back. The sirens were very close now. Blue-white light was beginning to come through the high windows, cycling, the unmistakable strobe of official authority descending on a location. Do-hun stepped away from his brother. He walked to where Amara stood at the door. He was holding his left arm differently now. She could see it clearly in the cycling light, the way the fabric of his jacket sat wrong at the shoulder, the way he was breathing slightly harder than his face was trying to suggest. You're hurt, she said. It's manageable. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. The cycling light moved across his face in alternating blue and white, and in it she could see the exhaustion he'd been carrying since before she'd met him, the weight of 14 months of building something careful and methodical, and then watching one person dismantle it from the inside. Yes, he said. I'm hurt. They moved. Through the door, up a half staircase she hadn't seen on the way in, through a space that had once been a loading office and still smelled of old paper and ink. A door at the end with a push bar. She hit it first because he was managing his shoulder, and the morning came in cold and gray and the sirens were on the street now. 4 of them, maybe 5, and the blue-white light was everywhere. They came out onto a side street running parallel to the main approach. Not clean. She could see 2 vehicles at the far end. Official, both pointed in. But between them and those vehicles was enough space and enough morning crowd that what they looked like was 2 people emerging from a building's side exit, which was exactly what they were. She walked. He walked beside her. Neither of them ran. Running was the tell. Walking was its own kind of invisibility, the same invisibility she'd practiced for 4 years on a floor where 43 people had learned to look through her, and she knew how to do it without thinking. Half a block. 1 block. At the corner, she stopped and looked back. The Pilsen warehouse was visible from here. Official vehicles angled at its entrance. People in vests moving with the purposeful organization of a coordinated response. Through the ground floor window, she could see the blue-white cycle of interior lights coming on. She could see, very faintly, the workstation screen still active, the confirmation of the transmission still visible. In the building, Minji was still there. She had not seen him move to leave. She had not seen Do-hun ask him to. She looked at Do-hun beside her. His face was still. Not the practiced blankness of control, the real stillness of someone at the end of something, the way a room feels after everyone has left, and the sound drops completely, and what's left is just the space where everything was. "He'll stay?" she said. "Yes." She looked at the building. That was his choice. Yes. She let that sit for a moment. She did not say anything about what it took for that to be someone's choice, because she didn't have the language for it that didn't feel inadequate, and inadequate was worse than silence. "The regulators have the package," she said. "Yes." "The accounts will start freezing within hours." "Yes." "Which means Vance's financial infrastructure starts collapsing today." "Yes." She looked at him. "And Celeste Hang," she said, "and the executives at Hanseon who were managing the cost center structure. They'll be named in the regulatory referral," he said. "The documentation you annotated makes the authorization chain explicit. Anyone with signing authority over those accounts is implicated directly." She thought about the 14th floor, about the morning before yesterday, which was actually yesterday morning, which felt like 3 years ago. About 43 people performing busyness while a woman was taken apart in the middle of an open office for being right about a benchmark revision. She thought about Celeste's soft, final click of the glass door. "Good," she said. The word came out clean and flat and without heat, which was the truest version of it. Not rage, just the settled acknowledgement of something that was correct. Do-hun looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. It took her a second to identify it, and then she did. It was the specific look of a person who has seen someone clearly, fully, without the distance of role or utility, just the actual human being standing in front of them. She looked back at him the same way. Around them, Chicago moved. The morning commute building, the L train audible somewhere to the north, the smell of the city in early October, exhaust and lake wind and coffee from somewhere nearby, and underneath it all, the cold mineral smell of the river 3 blocks west. Her phone was in her bag. She pulled it out. She had 17 missed calls, 12 from a number she recognized as her mother's landline, 4 from her mother's cell, 1 from a number she'd never seen, which was presumably the courtesy contact Min Jae or Vance's people had promised. She looked at the calls from her mother. She looked at the time, 8:34 in the morning. Wednesday. The morning that she had not arrived on the 14th floor of Hanseon Global Holdings with her lunch packed. She called her mother. It rang once. "Amara Jackson, where in the... I have been calling you since last night. I have been up since 3 in the morning. I called Marcus at that building and he told me you left with some people and I have been... Mama." Her voice came out different than she expected. Lower. Something in it she recognized as the thing that happened when she'd been holding herself together so long, the holding itself had become the effort. "I'm okay. I'm standing on a sidewalk in Pilsen and I'm okay." A silence on the other end, just breathing. "Are you hurt?" her mother said. Quieter now. "No." Are you safe? She looked at Do-hun beside her. She looked at the warehouse behind them. She looked at the flash drive in her pocket, the confirmation on the workstation screen, the regulatory timestamp that had been generated 11 minutes ago and was already, somewhere in the financial architecture of three countries, beginning to do what it was built to do. I will be, she said. Her mother said nothing for a moment, then, come home when you can. I will. And eat something. You sound like you haven't eaten. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost, which was close enough. I'll eat something, she said. She ended the call. She stood on the Pilsen sidewalk with the phone in her hand and the morning around her and Do-hun 2 feet to her left, favoring his left shoulder, looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man who has a very long day still ahead of him and knows it. Inside the warehouse, somewhere in the official machinery now filling it, Kong Min-jae was waiting for what came next. In the digital channels of 3 regulatory bodies across 2 continents, an annotated financial package was being opened for the first time. The first analysts beginning to read through the architecture of an empire that had spent 4 years being invisible. And on the 14th floor of Hanseon Global Holdings, in approximately 90 minutes, someone was going to arrive at work, sit down at a desk, open a routine audit request, and find that the accounts attached to a company called Pellinor Facilities Group had been frozen by international regulatory action overnight, which would trigger a compliance flag, which would escalate to a division head, which would begin a chain of events that would move very fast from that point and would not stop until it reached the people who deserved to be reached. Amara put her phone in her bag. What now? She said. Do-hun turned from the middle distance. He looked at her with the full attention she'd come to understand as his version of honesty. Direct, unshielded, nothing withheld. Now, he said, we go somewhere I can have someone look at my shoulder, and then we talk about what comes next. What does come next? He said nothing for a moment. Around them the city moved, the L train somewhere north, the lake wind cutting down the street with the specific cold that Chicago deployed in October as a reminder of what was coming. That depends, he said, on whether you're done. She looked at him. She thought about the $4,200. She thought about the decommissioned cost center and the dissolved company and the authorization credential belonging to a man who'd left the building 8 months before the payment was made. She thought about the thread, the one so thin it should have been invisible that she had pulled because a number was wrong and she could not leave a wrong number alone. She thought about what it felt like to send that package, the particular sensation of hitting a key and watching a timestamp generate and knowing that what you'd built had left your hands and was now in the world doing what it was supposed to do. She thought about Celeste's voice. She was not done. I'm not done, she said. Do-hun nodded, just once, like he'd known. Like he'd asked anyway because she deserved to be the one to say it. They walked north into the morning, 2 people moving through a city that was waking up around them. And behind them the blue-white light cycled through the warehouse windows, and the machinery of consequence turned slowly and then faster, and in the digital infrastructure of 3 continents, the first accounts began too. The first accounts froze at 9:17 in the morning. Amara knew because Do-hun's phone buzzed twice in his jacket pocket, while a man named Reyes was wrapping his shoulder in a converted medical room on the 2nd floor of a brownstone in Wicker Park that she had been told nothing about and had stopped asking questions about 2 hours ago. Do-hun looked at the screen, said nothing, and put the phone back in his pocket, but she saw his jaw release slightly. The specific relaxation of a muscle that has been held tight for a very long time. And she understood what the buzz meant. Reyes finished the wrap. He was compact and unhurried, and he spoke only to give instructions about range of motion and what Do-hun should not do with the shoulder for the next 3 days, which Do-hun acknowledged with a nod that suggested he had no particular intention of following any of it. When Reyes left the room, Do-hun pulled his shirt back on and sat on the edge of the narrow examination table and looked at his phone for a moment before looking up at her. 4 accounts, he said. 2 in the Caymans, 1 in Luxembourg, 1 in Singapore. Frozen as of 9/17. More will follow, she said. Yes. The Hanseon accounts will take longer. They're structured inside U.S. jurisdiction. The domestic regulatory process has more steps, but the international freezes establish the precedent. Once the pattern is documented across multiple jurisdictions, the domestic case builds itself. She was standing by the window, which faced a narrow street of parked cars and bare-branched trees. By end of day, they'll have enough to move on the domestic accounts. By end of week, the network is crippled. He put the phone away. Yes. She looked at the street. A woman walked past with a dog that was too small for the cold and was wearing a sweater that the dog clearly resented, completely ordinary. The world outside continuing its Wednesday with no awareness of the past 36 hours. Vance, she said. His financial infrastructure is tied to the network at 7 connection points. When the network freezes, his liquidity freezes with it. He can operate for approximately... He paused. Our estimate is 72 hours before he can no longer pay his people. That's when he becomes dangerous in a different way, she said. People who can't pay their people get unpredictable. Yes. He looked at her steadily. Which is why federal agents are currently executing warrants at 4 properties associated with his domestic operations. The financial freeze triggers an automatic escalation to the criminal division. They've been building a parallel case for 18 months. They needed the financial documentation to complete it. He paused again. Your package gave them what they needed. She turned from the window. You knew about the federal case. Yes. You knew transmitting to the regulatory contacts would trigger the criminal escalation. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back at her. She had spent 36 hours learning the particular texture of his silences, which ones were calculation, which ones were control, which ones were the kind of thing that lives underneath both of those and doesn't have a clean name. This one was the last kind. You could have told me that, she said, that transmitting the package would bring federal agents in. Yes, he said. I could have. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Because I was not certain you would transmit if you knew. She thought about that. She held it up against the past 36 hours. The car moving north from the loop, the night of work, the 73% on the scanner when the door came through, the phone call to her mother on a Pilsen sidewalk. She held it up against all of that and tried to determine whether he was right. She could not say with certainty that he was wrong. When the federal investigation starts pulling names, she said, my name is going to be in the records. Yes. As the person who reconstructed the network. You'll be identified as a cooperating witness with a protected status. The documentation I submitted alongside your financial package establishes your role as an involuntary civilian who provided analysis under duress. He said it carefully, like a man who has thought through the specific words. You will be required to give testimony. The FBI will want to debrief you. That process will not be comfortable. I've been uncomfortable before, she said. I'm familiar with it. Something moved in his expression. The same thing that had moved in it on the Pilsen sidewalk when she'd said she wasn't done. The recognition of a person seeing another person clearly. There's one thing I haven't told you, he said. She waited. Minjai. He looked at his hands. They were folded in his lap, a posture she'd never seen from him before. Less controlled than his usual stillness, more like a man sitting with something heavy. He didn't stay in this warehouse because he surrendered. He stayed because I asked him to. He looked up. He is my brother. What he did, the intelligence he passed, the people it cost, I cannot excuse it. I won't. But I asked him to stay and face the federal response rather than run, because running would mean spending the rest of his life as a fugitive. And He stopped. And you didn't want that for him, she said. I didn't want that for him. His voice was flat, but not empty. Flat the way a road is flat. Covering ground, getting somewhere, even if the surface gives nothing away. He agreed. That was his choice. I don't know if it was because he understood it was right or because he was out of options. Maybe both. Maybe there's no difference between those things at a certain point. She looked at him for a long time. He held it. Your father built this, she said. The original network. Pieces of it. The infrastructure that Vance's organization embedded itself into. That architecture predates my involvement. I inherited it the way you inherit anything from a parent who built things in the dark. You don't get to choose what's already standing. He unfolded his hands. What I've been trying to do for the past 14 months is dismantle it in a way that doesn't also destroy the legitimate operations connected to it. Thousands of people, jobs, businesses that have nothing to do with the laundering structure. And now? Now the regulators and the federal investigators will determine what's preserved and what's prosecuted. I have no more control over that. He said it without bitterness, which told her it had cost him something to arrive at the place where he could say it that way. I submitted a full disclosure alongside your financial package. My own involvement, every decision I made in the past 14 months, including the ones I'm not proud of. He paused. Including not telling you about the federal escalation. She sat down on the chair across from him. The room was small. A desk, 2 chairs, the examination table, a window with a shade half drawn. The smell of antiseptic from Reyes's work still in the air. You're going to be prosecuted, she said. Possibly. My attorney believes the cooperation agreement and the disclosure will result in a reduced exposure. But yes, possibly. And you submitted the disclosure anyway? Yes. She looked at him. He looked at her. Why? She said. He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, because you transmitted that package knowing you were going to be in the records, knowing the federal case would connect your name to everything. You did it anyway because it was the right thing, and the right thing was the only move you could live with. He paused. I have been trying to do the right thing for 14 months in ways that preserved my own position. Last night I watched you do it without trying to preserve anything at all. He looked at his folded hands. I found that instructive. She said nothing for a while. Outside, the woman with the small, resentful dog passed back in the other direction. The dog's sweater was still on. The dog's opinion of it had not improved. I need to go home, she said. I know. My mother's house. I need to go there and sit in her kitchen and eat whatever she makes without arguing about it and sleep for approximately 11 hours. I can have someone. I'll take a cab. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at him sitting on the examination table, his left shoulder wrapped under his shirt, his phone in his pocket with the notification of 4 frozen accounts that were the first stones pulled from the base of something enormous. After I sleep, she said, the FBI is going to want to talk to me. Yes. And after that, there will be testimony, depositions, a process that will take months. Yes. She looked at him steadily. And after all of that is done, whatever you offered me in that first building, the role in your legitimate operations, the independent authority, the ability to report without interference, does that offer still exist? Or does it depend on what the federal case decides about your exposure? He looked at her. The offer exists regardless. The legitimate operations are structured separately from anything under federal review. They will survive the investigation. He paused. They would be better with you in them. She nodded once, slowly. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. She moved toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back at him. Your shoulder, she said. Actually follow what Reyes told you, at least for a day. He looked at her with that almost not quite smile. I'll consider it. She left. The cab she took from Wicker Park to Bronzeville smelled like pine air freshener and old coffee, and the driver had a talk radio program on at a volume slightly too low to follow, which suited her exactly. She sat in the back with her bag on her lap and the flash drive in her pocket and watched Chicago move past the window. Pilsen behind her, the South Side coming up, the city organizing itself into its neighborhoods the way it always did, each block its own register of the place. She thought about nothing specific. That was the most honest way to put it. Her mind had been running at a particular speed for 36 hours, and it did not know yet how to drop below that speed, so it ran, but without direction, spinning loose without catching on anything. She let it. The cab moved south and the city moved past, and she let her mind spin loose until it didn't. Her mother was on the porch when the cab pulled up, standing with her arms crossed against the October cold, wearing the green cardigan she wore when she was too anxious to stay inside but too practical to make a production of it. She watched the cab pull up. She watched Amara get out. She looked at her daughter from the porch steps with the specific expression of a woman who has been awake since 3 in the morning and has spent those hours making calculations about what she would say and has now abandoned all of them in favor of just looking. Amara walked up the steps. Her mother put both arms around her. Not gently, firmly. The way you hold something you were afraid you might not get back. Amara stood in it. She did not cry. She had thought she might cry, and she didn't, not then, and she didn't examine why. She just stood in her mother's arms on the porch of the Bronzeville house she'd grown up in and let herself be held for exactly as long as it took to feel the particular quality of safety that only existed in this specific place. "You look terrible," her mother said, pulling back to look at her face. "Thank you, Mama. You smell like you've been in a building that was built before I was born. Multiple buildings. Come inside." She came inside. The kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee that had been kept too long on the burner and something else underneath it, something that had been started in the slow cooker early enough in the morning that it had become an act of faith. Her mother putting a meal on at 5 a.m. because she had decided Amara was coming home and was going to eat. She sat at the table she'd sat at her entire life, the one with the mark on the corner from when she was 7, and dragged a metal toy across the surface, and her mother had said they were going to leave it there as a reminder not to use the table as a racetrack. The mark was still there. She put her hand on it. Her mother put coffee in front of her and sat down across from her and looked at her with the clear, unhurried attention of someone who has decided not to ask questions but is available for answers. "I found something at work," Amara said. "I gathered. It was bigger than I expected. Most things are." She looked at her coffee. "I might lose my job." "Your job at that place." Her mother's voice was careful, exact. "That woman who runs your department, the one you don't tell me about but that I know about anyway." "Celeste." Amara wrapped both hands around the mug. "She's going to be arrested." Her mother said nothing for a moment. She looked at her daughter across the table with an expression that was several things at once. Not surprise, not quite satisfaction, not grief exactly, but the complicated adult acknowledgement of a thing that is the right outcome and still carries cost. "And you?" she said. "I'll be a witness. There's a process. It'll take time." She paused. "I'm okay, Mama. I need you to know that first, before anything else. I'm okay." "I can see you're okay." Her mother reached across the table and put her hand over Amara's. "I can also see what okay cost you." Amara looked at her mother's hand. She thought about cold water on pulse points, about turkey sandwiches, about space heaters and annual audits, and 4 years of catching other people's errors in a room where nobody asked her name correctly. "I found a $4,000 discrepancy," she said, "in a routine audit. That's where it started." Her mother looked at her. "Of course, that's where it started," she said, with the particular tone of a woman who has watched her daughter do exactly this for 34 years. "You have never been able to leave a wrong number alone." Amara looked at her. Something broke loose in her chest. Not painfully, more like the way ice breaks in March. The slow structural release of something that has been held frozen for longer than it needed to be. She laughed. Short, slightly ragged at the edges, the kind of laugh that carries more than amusement in it, but real. "No," she said, "I haven't." Her mother squeezed her hand once and stood up to get the food. The next 3 months were not clean. She had not expected them to be, and the not expecting meant she could move through them without the additional weight of disappointment on top of everything else. The FBI debriefing took 4 sessions over 2 weeks. The lead agent was a woman named Carver, mid-40s, direct, the kind of person who asked the same question from 3 different angles to confirm the answer and then wrote a single word in her notebook. She was not warm, but she was fair, and fair was what Amara needed from that room. She sat across from Agent Carver and answered every question with the same precision she'd brought to 30 years of financial records, because precision was the only language she'd ever trusted completely. And she answered from memory because her memory was what it was. And Carver's single-word notation became longer over the course of 4 sessions until she was writing full sentences and then full paragraphs. And by the final session, she set the notebook down entirely and just listened. After the last session, walking out of the federal building on South Dearborn, Carver stopped her in the corridor. "Off the record," Carver said. "Okay. I've been in financial crimes for 16 years. I have never seen a civilian-constructed evidentiary package of that quality. Annotated, hierarchically structured, source-coded, with a precision that our forensic accountants could follow without a single clarification request." She paused. "You did that in 8 hours, under physical duress, in a building that was being breached." 7 hours, Amara said. "The first hour was mostly legal pads." Carver looked at her for a moment. "What did you do before this, before Hanzian?" "The same thing," Amara said, "in a smaller room, Carver nodded slowly. Well, she said, the Bureau is going to be very interested in you once this case closes. She didn't respond to that. She said goodbye and walked out into the November air, which was cold in the way Chicago November is cold, completely without apology, as if cold were the natural state of the world, and anything warmer had simply been a temporary exception. Celeste Hang was arrested on a Thursday morning 6 weeks after the transmission. Amara knew because it was on the local news, the brief, businesslike, the kind of item that gets 90 seconds and a mugshot. She watched it on her phone while sitting in the lobby of her attorney's office, waiting for a pre-testimony preparation meeting, and felt nothing dramatic about it. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something quieter. The feeling of a column of figures finally balancing, the rightness of numbers that have found their correct alignment after being wrong for too long. The mugshot showed Celeste without the glass office context, without the performance of authority, without the precise management of a room. She looked like a person who had made a series of choices that had compounded in a direction she'd never fully mapped. She looked, Amara thought, like someone who had spent a long time believing she was building something, who had just discovered what she'd actually built. She put the phone away. 3 other Hansyon executives were arrested in the same sweep. The domestic accounts were frozen by the end of November. The international network collapsed in stages over 6 weeks, each jurisdiction acting on the regulatory package in its own sequence, each freeze triggering the next, the architecture of the empire dismantling itself along the exact structural lines she had mapped in handwriting on 3 legal pads in a single night. Anton Vance was arrested on a Tuesday at his home in Oak Park by a federal response team that arrived at 6 in the morning. She read that one in the newspaper, actual newspaper. Her mother had a subscription, and it appeared on the porch every morning. She read it over coffee. The article was 7 paragraphs. It mentioned a financial intelligence package provided by a cooperating civilian witness. It did not use her name. She was okay with that. Kong Min-jae entered a guilty plea in December. The federal agreement acknowledged his cooperation. The fragments Ji-yeon had pulled from the archive before the override, supplemented by the testimony he gave in his debrief, had filled several of the gaps in the intelligence picture that the financial records couldn't address. His sentencing was scheduled for the following spring. She did not attend the plea hearing. She had not been asked to and would not have gone if she had been. That was Do-hun's room to be in, or not to be in, and she had no business there. She saw Do-hun for the first time after Pilsen in late November. Not secretly. A formal meeting, requested through his attorney, coordinated through her attorney, conducted in a conference room in a law office on Michigan Avenue with both legal representatives present and a court reporter in the corner. The meeting was technically a coordination session for an aspect of the regulatory case where their evidentiary positions overlapped. For 20 minutes, it was exactly that. Precise, procedural. The 2 attorneys managing the exchange with the careful attention of people who understood the legal terrain on all sides. Then the attorneys stepped out for a separate consultation and left them alone in the conference room. He looked better than he had in Pilsen. The shoulder had healed or was healing. He moved without favoring it. He was dressed the same way he always dressed, the dark suit, the controlled presentation. But there was something different about the way he was sitting, less compressed, like a person who has set something down. "How are you?" he said. "I'm fine." She looked at him. "Your shoulder. Functional?" A pause. "How is your mother?" "She made me eat for 3 weeks straight. I've recovered." The not quite smile. "Good." She looked at the conference table between them, long, polished, reflecting the November gray from the window. "Your disclosure," she said, "the federal position on your cooperation. The agreement is in process. My attorney expects a resolution in the spring, reduced exposure in exchange for full cooperation and the disclosure." He paused. "I will likely not go to prison." "Likely," she said. "Nothing is certain." "No," she said. "It isn't." They sat with that for a moment. "The offer still stands," he said. "When everything is resolved. When you've finished with the testimony and the federal process and whatever comes after, the role, the independence, the authority." He looked at her directly. "I want you to lead the financial intelligence operation for the legitimate holdings, not as a courtesy, not because you are useful in a crisis, because you are the most capable person I have encountered at what you do, and the work deserves someone who does it the right way." She looked at him. What does the right way mean to you? She said. It means the way you did it, he said. When you didn't know who I was or why I was there. When copying those files to a flash drive was the only thing that made sense because a number was wrong and you couldn't leave it wrong. That was not strategy. That was not ambition. He paused. That was integrity. The unthinking kind. The kind that operates before you decide to be the kind of person who has it. She was quiet for a long moment. I'll think about it, she said. The same words she'd used in the Wicker Park brownstone. He heard the echo of them. She could see it. The slight shift in his expression that acknowledged the repetition. That's all I'm asking, he said. The attorneys came back. The meeting resumed its procedural character and concluded 12 minutes later. She left without any of it being dramatic, which was the right way for it to go. She thought about it for 3 weeks. She thought about it the way she thought about financial problems, by not forcing it, by letting the numbers sit until the pattern became clear, by trusting that the truth of the matter was already present in the available information and only required the right reading. She thought about what it would mean to work for a man whose past was what his past was, whose family had built what they'd built in the dark. She thought about the independence he'd offered and what independence actually meant in practice, not the word, but the mechanism, the structural reality of having the authority to report wrongdoing without interference, which was either real or it wasn't, and you couldn't know for certain until you tested it. She thought about the 14th floor of Hansean Global Holdings, about the cold air from the duct, about the space heater that technically violated building policy, about 4 years of clean audits that nobody had credited, about a $4,200 discrepancy in a decommissioned cost center. She thought about what she'd done with that discrepancy. She called Do-hun's attorney the day after Christmas. She said she had a decision. The attorney arranged a meeting for January 2nd, the first business day of the new year, which she appreciated for its precision. She arrived at the Michigan Avenue office at 8 in the morning. Do-hun was already there, which told her he'd arrived before 8, which told her something she filed away without examining too closely. They sat across from each other at the same conference table, same November gray light replaced by January pale sun coming through the same windows. No attorneys this time. She'd requested it that way and he'd agreed. 3 conditions, she said. He waited. Complete independence in reporting. Any financial irregularity I identify in the legitimate operations goes to regulatory authorities without requiring your approval or awareness. I report it, and then I tell you, not the other way around. Agreed. Second, I build my own team. I don't inherit your existing structure. I hire who I choose, I set the methodology, and the team answers to me and not to any other division within the organization. Agreed. Third, she paused. If I ever find that the legitimate operations are being used as a conduit for something they shouldn't be, anything, at any scale, regardless of who authorized it, I report it immediately, to regulators, to federal authorities if warranted. And my employment status at that point is irrelevant. I don't ask permission, and I don't negotiate. I report. He looked at her steadily. Even if reporting implicates me. Especially then. The sun came through the window and moved across the table between them, a line of pale January light crossing the polished wood. Agreed, he said. She nodded. She looked down at the table for a moment. She looked at her hands. The same hands that had copied files onto a flash drive 2 months ago in a room gone suddenly careful and silent. The same hands that had written 37 pages of annotations while a building was being breached. The same hands that had pressed flat on a workstation desk and watched a progress bar reach 100%. I'll need an office, she said, with better ventilation than my last one. He looked at her. The not-quite smile arrived, and this time it went slightly further than it usually did. Enough to qualify, she thought, as an actual smile, the real version, brief but unambiguous. I'll arrange it, he said. She started on the 15th of January. The office was on the 18th floor of a building in the West Loop. Windows on 2 sides, ventilation that worked the way ventilation was supposed to work, a temperature that did not require a cardigan on the back of the chair. She did not bring a cardigan. She bought a new one and put it in the bottom drawer of the desk where it would stay unless she needed it. She built her team over 6 weeks. 3 people. A forensic accountant from Minneapolis who had the same inability to leave a wrong number alone that she had. A compliance specialist who had left a federal agency job because the bureaucracy had slowed her down. and Ji-yeon, who she'd called directly without going through Do-hun, because Ji-yeon had stood against the wall of a compromised building holding a hard drive against her chest and not moved, which was the clearest possible demonstration of professional character. Ji-yeon had said yes before she'd finished the offer. The first morning, all four of them were in the office together. Amara stood at the window for a moment before she sat down. Chicago below her, the West Loop version, the metro tracks, the restaurant district waking up, the specific texture of the city from 18 floors up, which was different from 42 floors but more real somehow, closer to the level where things actually happened. She thought about the 14th floor of Hanseon Global Holdings, about the day she'd walked in with a perfectly ironed blouse and a turkey sandwich, and come out the other end of 36 hours a different person, or the same person finally in the right context. She still wasn't entirely sure which. She sat down. She opened the first report in her queue, a routine cross-reference of Pacific Division disbursements, standard audit procedure, the kind of thing that should have been clean and probably was. She started reading. At the third page, a line item caught. A vendor payment. Small. The amount was $3,800, coded to a facilities maintenance account with a reference number she didn't recognize. She sat up straighter. She pulled up the vendor registry. She ran the verification check. She cross-referenced the cost center. The cost center existed. The vendor existed. The authorization chain was complete. She exhaled. Then she looked at the date on the payment. The payment was dated 2 weeks before the vendor had been registered in the system. She looked at it for a moment. She opened a new document. She pulled the vendor registration record. She pulled the authorization timestamp. She put them side by side. The payment existed before the vendor did. She leaned forward. Across the office, her forensic accountant looked up from his workstation, recognized the particular quality of her stillness. He had learned it already in 6 weeks, the specific posture of a person who has found something, and said, "What is it?" She looked at the screen. The numbers were clear. The discrepancy was small. The kind of small that was designed to not attract attention. The kind of small that worked because most people were looking for big. "Pull the full disbursement record for this vendor code," she said. "Everything in the system going back 3 years." He turned to his workstation. "All 3 years?" "All 3 years," she said, "and cross-reference against the vendor registration dates for every code in this division." He started pulling. She turned back to her screen. The number in front of her was wrong. She could not leave it wrong. She had never been able to leave a wrong number alone, not at 9 years old doing her mother's household accounts for practice, not at 22 in her first accounting job, not at 34 on the 14th floor of Hanseon Global Holdings, when a $4,200 discrepancy in a decommissioned cost center had unraveled an empire. She picked up her pen. She began. The woman who had been called the fat girl no one wanted, the clumsy one, the one just taking up space. She sat in an office with 2 windows and working ventilation and a team she had chosen herself, and she did the thing she had always done, the only thing that had ever fully belonged to her. She found what was wrong. She wrote it down. She was not invisible and she was not overlooked, and she was not the person who absorbed damage quietly in a room that refused to see her. She was the person who had pulled a thread so thin it should not have been visible and had not let go of it until everything connected to it had come into the light. She bent her head over the desk and worked, and outside the window Chicago moved through its January morning, enormous and indifferent, and completely unaware, as it had always been, that something important was happening on the 18th floor. It was enough that she knew. It had always been enough that she knew.